Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of the Fulbrighter podcast. Fulbrighter is an exclusive networking platform for Fulbright alumni and grantees. The platform lets you keep up to date with news from the global community of Fulbrighters and connect with fellow alumni and grantees from around the world. If you are a current grantee or an alumni from an official Fulbright program, head to fulbrighternetwork.com to create your account. My name is Gabriele Jimenez, and I'm a journalist and the community manager for the Fulbrighter platform. Today, I will have a conversation with Kathleen Mulligan. Kathleen is a professor of voice and speech at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance at Ithaca College. She's also the vice president of the Central New York chapter of Fulbright Association and has been granted Fulbright Awards in India and Pakistan, in which she worked on different projects aimed at supporting local women. Hi, Kathleen. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. So I want to start before we dive into the amazing work that you've been doing. I just want to ask you a little bit about your history with Fulbright. So when did you first learn about the program?
I probably had heard, I know I had heard about it. My husband had a friend who had had a couple of Fulbrights to Italy. But to be honest, I always thought that was something for, really smart people and scholars. So it wasn't really on my radar until I started my work at Ithaca College.
And I understand that your first Fulbright Award was in India. That was your first experience.
Yes.
Why did you choose India for the first award? Was that something that was already on your mind, or did it come afterwards? How did you end up going to India for the first award?
It was kind of by chance. I received an email sent out by a colleague at Ithaca College. I didn't know her, but she had had a Fulbright to India, and she wrote to say that the deadline for applications was being extended. And I had just taught a workshop for women at Cornell University for professors and had noticed something I'd been noticing for several years, that some women seem to have a real challenge using their full voice, as I like to say, taking up a little more space in the world with their voices. And I had actually had a couple of women from India in that workshop and had talked to them about this phenomenon, I would say. And the other thing was that my husband was the child of a Methodist minister. And when he was 3 months old, his father took the whole family to India to lead a multi-denominational Protestant church in Delhi. And so my husband's first 6 months of his life, 6 months, 6 years of his life, were in India, and he had always wanted to return. So that was kind of an added um, incentive for applying in India.
I understand. So I really want to talk to you about your experiences in India, but I'm also curious because you are a professor of voice and speech, right? I don't think that's
Yes.
very clear for everybody who might be listening to us exactly what that entails, right? What does that mean? Is it singing? Is it actually more about, presentations? Or can you tell us a little bit about this field and what exactly you do as a professor of voice and speech?
Sure. And I'm so glad you asked that because most people either think I'm a speech therapist or they think I'm a singing teacher, and I'm neither. Um, for an actor and an actor in training, voice is incredibly important because, for obvious reasons, we have to be seen and heard on stage, but also, voice to me and breath, which is such an important part of voice work, is really the way into true and honest and accessible emotions for an actor. So I like to say that I'm responsible for everything they do when they're not singing. We have a really competitive and very highly regarded musical theater program here, and also an equally highly regarded acting program at Ithaca College. But I work with them when they're speaking, so everything but singing. And I work on vocal production, breath support, breath release, and also speech work, mostly clarity of speech. Um, as I like to say to my students, I'm not interested in you all sounding the same. I just want to make sure that you can be understood by an audience. And also text work. So, especially heightened text like Shakespeare, August Wilson, um, uh, Tennessee Williams, the more difficult textual work. I do a lot of work with that with students too.
That's very interesting. So I understand you're very involved with acting as well.
Yes.
So are you an actress?
Yes, I am. I've been a professional actress for, yikes, about 40 years now. And I do continue to perform. I'm a member of Actors Equity Association, which is the union for professional stage actors. Um, used to work as close to full time as I could, but now I do that in addition to my teaching. And mostly what I do, I perform The Belle of Amherst, which is a solo show about the poet Emily Dickinson. And for the last couple of years, that's what I've been focusing my acting work on, is doing that around the world, really. I've done it, performed it all over India, in Nepal, in Lebanon, in Laos, and at certain places in the United States.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I think that gives us a little introduction into your actual project in India. So I'm glad that we could discuss your prior project as well. So could you tell me a little bit more about your first project in India? It was aimed at empowering local women through voice, right? As I understand. So, can you explain? I'm interested in knowing if when you went to India, you already had a clear vision for that project, or if that kind of changed as you arrived there. So, just tell us a little bit about the whole journey, if you can.
Well, I'll say I had a clear vision of the project and it changed when I got there. As tends to happen with, I think, probably every Fulbrighter. Yeah, because I had never been to India, did not have much exposure to the culture. So, of course, I had to make adjustments when I got there. But the main focus was teaching workshops to women, helping them to find a little more power, a little more authority, a little more confidence in speaking in public, in work situations, classroom situations, etc. Um, I ended up working with graduate students, kindergarten teachers, high school girls. I also worked with men at times, but my focus was on women. And as I think I mentioned before, my sort of encouraging women to take up a little more space in the world with their voices. And I would often start my workshops by asking the women, what kind of messages did you get growing up about how you should speak? Because I know as a young woman growing up in the United States, I got plenty of messages, both um, actual, verbally stated and also sort of unconsciously communicated about how I should speak. And so I would ask the women that. And a lot of times in India, they would say that we're not supposed to, that women should be seen and not heard, that we should speak sweetly and softly. And so we would just work um, on finding more breath support, a little more power in the voice. I would try to make very clear I'm not asking you to yell. And it may sound like that because you're not used to using that much power in your voice, but it's just really about um, getting the breath underneath the voice and being able to fill whatever room you're in comfortably with your voice.
And I think you mentioned something that caught my attention. That's, you got a lot of, growing up in the US, you also got a lot of feedback about how you should be heard as a woman, right? And then you went to India and you were asking the women that. Were there any parallels? Is it extremely different? And I don't mean just the US and India, because I also heard that you've been around, the world. So maybe you have also feedback from other places. But I'm I'm interested in knowing whether that is an experience that is changing a lot from country to country, or if there is one kind of line that, is connecting all countries in terms of how women are subconsciously told or very directly told that they should sound like.
I think I mean, I haven't been to every country in the world. I wish I had. But I would say that it's pretty prevalent. The messages might be slightly different. And this is not only for women, men get messages too, especially, I would say, men in the United States, which causes them to kind of push their voices down and try to sound more quote unquote masculine. Um, but in the United States, for myself, my experience was that I have a pretty deep voice, but I didn't get a lot of positive reinforcement for that when I was younger. So I started talking, kind of up here and, sort of cute, like I often refer to it as little girl voices, right? So that's the kind of messages I got and had to kind of it was a journey to own what my voice is, and that, my voice is pretty powerful. It's a little bit lower. It's not super low. In fact, I went through a stage where I was pushing my own voice down too much because I thought that's what a serious actress should sound like. So it was a journey to find what my voice is. Um but I would say variations on a theme, across many cultures about, women not being threatening, and what's perceived as threatening. Um, if a woman speaks loudly and powerfully, often she's, described as being pushy or, "Who does she think she is?" or things like that, and, you just don't hear that. I don't think men get those same messages.
Yeah, I think that's something that it's important to think about and to reflect upon, because it definitely has a big impact in culture and in society as a whole, right? So you were telling me you went to India, so you started helping local women and also girls find their voices and feel more comfortable expressing themselves. But I know that eventually that project kind of culminated in a new project. So maybe you can tell me what was the experience like until you created the project that I really want to hear about, which is Wheels for Women. How did that happen? Because that wasn't the first thing you were working on as you got there, right?
Right, it was not, but the same woman who had sent out that email to Ithaca College, um, she had gone to India, and she connected me with the college where she was a Fulbrighter, and that college ultimately ended up inviting me as a Fulbrighter, so that was my letter of invitation, and I met with her several times. She was very generous, as far as connecting me with people, and she connected me with a woman named Bina Sebastian, who lives in the, same area where I was hosted, which is Kalamassery in Kerala, and Bina, is an amazing person and a woman deeply committed to peace and nonviolent conflict resolution. She's a true Gandhian, I would say. And she runs an organization called the Cultural Academy for Peace in Kerala. And part of that is uh, actually two shelters for women, um, women who are survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, and the sex trade. And so I contacted Bina, and she invited me to come teach my workshop at the shelter. And my husband accompanied me, my husband David, he was with me during my whole Fulbright time. And he accompanied me, but he stayed pretty much out of sight because he thought the last thing these particular women need is a man standing there while they're trying to discover their voices, right? But he was very moved. We were both very moved by the work Bina is doing. And at the end of the workshop, we actually shared um, an auto rickshaw with Bina to go back to our home. And my husband, David, asked her, "What do you need more than anything? What do you need most?" Um, and she said, "We need a vehicle because we get calls from women, desperate women in the middle of the night, or from police stations who have a woman and her children there. And we have to go rescue them. And that involves depending on finding an auto rickshaw or another form of taxi that will probably have a male taxi driver and hoping that they're sympathetic." So my husband had just heard about the Nano, which was a $2,000 car that Tata invented. And he thought, we can raise $2,000. So before I knew it, David said, we can raise you the money for that. And I thought, what? We can? Um, so because we are performers and because I have access to a lot of extremely talented young people, we decided to produce a cabaret that summer when we returned to the US. And we were working at a summer theater in Holland, Michigan. And we got together, a group of the performers, and we performed this cabaret, this musical cabaret. And we raised $4,000. And when we reached out to Bina, she said, well, actually, more than a car, we would love an auto rickshaw because we have a resident of the shelter who would like to be trained as an auto rickshaw driver. So that rickshaw cost about $4,000. We purchased the rickshaw for the shelter, and we also paid for this young woman, Bindu, to be trained as an auto rickshaw driver. And I'm very proud to say that 15 years later, Bindu is a very successful auto rickshaw driver. She put both her children through college. She lives on her own or with her children in an apartment. And several years ago, her husband, who was abusive, came back and asked her if she would take him back. And she said no. And her children supported her in that decision. She is a completely self-sufficient member of society who supports herself and supported her children by being an auto rickshaw driver. So that was the start of Wheels for Women. And since then, that fall, one of my students who was working at the same theater came to me and said, I think we should do this every year at Ithaca College. And so every year since then, my students have produced a benefit cabaret. We've raised over $80,000 for Wheels for Women. We've purchased, I think, now 5 rickshaws and trained over 25 women as auto rickshaw drivers.
Wow, that's fantastic. And have you been back since?
Yes, several times. I went back in 2015 and visited the shelter and met some of the trainees. I was back in 2017, and that was a very special trip because I arranged a visit to go to the shelter and meet with Bina. And Bindu, our first trainee, picked me up in her rickshaw and brought me to my meeting, and that was quite a day for me. Full circle. And then I had a second Fulbright to India just in 2023, and, my husband and I visited the shelter and spent time with some of the trainees and with Bina. Bina's become a very close friend of ours, and so we're in pretty close contact.
I'm interested also in why do you think this project is so important? Not only obviously because, it supports women who are maybe otherwise unable to leave abusive situations, but do you also think that something like this inspires the creation of other similar initiatives in the area? Have you heard about, how people feel when they see that is working, that it's thriving? I'm just kind of also interested in the footprint as well, right? That it leaves behind. And do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, 2 things. I would say more I I can't really speak to, um, how this might have inspired other organizations in the Kerala area. I'm not sure about that. Bina would probably be a better person to answer that question, but I know that I hope that it's inspired other Fulbrighters to continue their work or find some way to continue to contribute to the country where they were hosted after their official grant is over. I did a presentation at a Fulbright Association conference quite a few years ago, and I entitled it, "You Don't Have to Be Bill Gates." Because I think sometimes we think, well, I'm a professor, I don't have any money, what can I do? But it doesn't have to be a big effort, right? We can all find ways to contribute. And the other thing is, I know it's had a profound effect on my students. I love my students and they're incredibly talented but to be honest, actors in training can be a little bit tunnel vision about their goals and I want to be on Broadway, I want to be doing films in Hollywood, etc. And that's all great. But I love that this project also demonstrates for them that they can use their talents, we could even say their God-given talents, to make some change, to have an effect on the world and actually, um, make a difference for people maybe in a place they've never been. And I love seeing that. And then after the cabaret and when we total up how much we've made that year, to see them really realize, wow, I did that. I helped to do that by contributing my talents to this event. Um, I'm really making a difference, and that is very important to me.
Do you think that by connecting, communities that are geographically so far apart, um, there is also something where your students are kind of learning, about empathy or learning about this completely different culture as well. So apart, from feeling fulfilled that they're supporting, do you think there's also like an exchange of ideas that you see happening, which, it's kind of also, I think, a big part of the Fulbright program, right? So I'm interested in how you see, your work also expanding on Fulbright's mission outside of the Fulbright program, but within your own students, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Definitely empathy building. I've never been able to arrange any kind of, it would be nice to do something like this with some of the women there and some of my students. Of course, the time difference can make it very challenging. And I'd want to make sure, obviously, that it was women that felt comfortable doing that because a lot of them are quite traumatized. Um, but I would say several of the women have shared their stories and in written form, and my students have been able to read them so that they have a real concrete understanding of what who some of the women are that they are helping to support. And on the other side, we always send our recording of the cabaret to the shelter so that the women can see it, and I think that's really powerful. Um, so I hope in that way it is supporting the Fulbright mission, which is extremely important to me. I think that answers your question. Is there any part of your question I didn't answer
No,
with that?
I think that's exactly what I was interested in, knowing kind of how they are connecting. Um, I also, I was thinking about because you had this first Fulbright in India, which is when this project was born, but I know that your Fulbright journey is way more extensive than just that project, right? So do you want to tell us a little bit about your other awards? Because I understand you had a project in Pakistan as well, that, as far as I can tell, is also kind of connected to all of the work that you did in India, although, in a different form and shape, but it's also about, empowering local women and supporting their voices being heard. So can you tell us a little bit more about once you come back from India, once you've established this project, how did you realize, you wanted another Fulbright grant, and how did you end up in Pakistan? So I would love to hear a little bit more about that as well.
Sure. When people ask me, sometimes I talk to Fulbright grantees before they go. Um, and the one bit of advice I always give is if a door opens, walk through it because you don't know where it's going to lead. And I would say that that's true for me with my whole journey as a Fulbrighter because you probably know, I would assume that this is true in every country, that the commission hosts a conference. In India, it's twice a year, every 6 months, for all the Fulbrighters that are there. And so I went to the one when I was there in 2010, and we all had to give little like 5 minute um, talks about our project. And Rita Akhtar, who was the executive director of Fulbright in Pakistan, attended mine. And she came up to me after and said, I'd love you to come to Pakistan. And so at least at that time, the only kind of Fulbright you could get to Pakistan was a Fulbright Specialist Award. So when I got back to the US, I applied for that. And I ended up going to Pakistan first to to do this work, to work with women on empowerment through voice. I ended up doing a lot of different things. I vocal coached for a local theater company. And then my husband got a Fulbright Specialist grant. We went back together and we were going to do this staged reading of To Kill a Mockingbird, which had to be canceled because of a local demonstration, not against our project. It just happened to coincide. Um, but while I was in Pakistan, I started to hear a lot about the partition of Pakistan and India in 1947 and what that event was like. An event that a huge historical event that I, as a person growing up in the United States, knew virtually nothing about. And, during that time, over 10 million people were forced to migrate, and over 1 million people were killed. And so I also thought, okay, that was 1947, and these stories are passing away, right? The people that remember them are in their 80s and 90s. So I devised a project and a proposal to do a project that would interview survivors of partition and create a theater piece based on those interviews. And this was an idea that came out of a project I do with my students at Ithaca College. So I ended up applying for and getting a grant from the United States Embassy in Islamabad, and that combined with the support from the Fulbright Specialist Program allowed me and my husband to go back to Pakistan, and we collaborated with a local theater in Islamabad, Theatre Wale. Um, they did a lot of work going out into villages, interviewing survivors. We collected the stories and we created this theater piece and toured it to some locations in Pakistan and also to the United States. And that project is probably the most meaningful thing I've ever done in my career. I'm most proud of it. We then applied for and received another grant from the embassy. We joined with another Fulbright alum, Linda Alper, who is an actor and playwright. And we did a second project called On Common Ground that explored the effect of violence on public space. And that also toured through Pakistan and to the west coast of the United States. So that was my Pakistan work. Then I wanted to collect stories from the other side of the border in India about partition. And time was running short, right? This was 10 years later, almost 10 years later. I applied for and got another Fulbright to India, a Fulbright Nehru Scholar Grant. And that time I based myself in Amritsar because that's right over the border from Lahore, and it's where some of the worst violence during partition occurred. I was hosted by Khalsa College in Amritsar, which actually during partition was a refugee camp on the campus. And I worked with students this time, drama students at Khalsa College. And we went out into the villages. And that time I was able to accompany them. I was able to attend these interviews. And I mean, we interviewed one man who was 98 years old, still sharp as a tack. And so we got some incredible stories about partition from those survivors, and we created a theatrical piece for that too. So that's kind of my Fulbright journey.
I think it's amazing listening to you because I agree with you that, it's really important work, um, especially when those stories are going away. So I think it's also so important to be able to register them somehow and to transform them into something else, right? But there seems to be a connection that I've noticed on the work that you've done both in India and in Pakistan, which is using art as a tool for the healing process, right? Whether it be coming out of an abusive situation or, processing the violence of, the partition that you've mentioned. So, was this something that you've always known, or have you studied, the subject, or was it something that you just instinctively knew that, art can be a way to heal these wounds? Or I just find it really interesting when I see that, art is being used as a way to kind of support people going through, the worst of the worst. So, can you tell me a little bit about how you've connected these dots, or was this something that just, came out of you naturally because of your previous experience as an actress?
Yeah, I can't say that I consciously started out thinking that, I mean, I always understood that theater, at least, art in general, and of course, my experiences in theater. Shakespeare said, hold us toward a mirror up to life. I think art can reflect back for us in a dark theater where we can explore something sort of safely. Theater can reflect back for us what the worst of humanity can be and what the best of humanity can be. And I think can open our minds by telling stories and by humanizing stories. And I'm also very passionate about art being used to connect young people to their histories and to what came before. A lot of the partition survivors said, my children don't want to hear this story. I've been waiting to tell this story my whole life. So I know that many of the students the students I worked with, especially in India, thanked me later and said, I just never took the time to hear these stories and to learn about what happened then and what my own grandmother or my own great grandmother went through. Um, so I think art can be a way of preserving stories and also a way of opening people's hearts. When we did the project, when we opened it in Islamabad, the partition project, several people came up to us and said, I didn't know the same thing happened on the other side. They thought it only happened in Pakistan. They didn't realize that there was violence in India too, and people suffering on that side of the border as well. So I thought, well, that's a powerful thing to communicate, right? Yeah. So I think it can humanize the other, the other. I'll just say the other. And I'll tell you a story. Early on in the project in India, which was in 2023, I had originally thought that I would love to bring some of the actors from Pakistan to India to work with us. A lot of those people in Pakistan have become some of my dearest friends. My husband and I are very connected to them. And they're incredibly wonderful, generous people. But of course, the political situation between Pakistan and India did not make that possible. But the students in India were very curious about the project we had done before. And I said, we could have a Zoom meeting with some of those actors. And they said, yes, yes, we'd love to do that. So one night we got them all together on Zoom, and the people from Pakistan have moved all over the world. Like there were people signing in from Canada, from Germany, from I think the UAE. I'm trying to remember where all the places were. Um, and it was all in Punjabi because, I mean, obviously, the Pakistani actors were speaking in Urdu, but they were able to understand each other reasonably well because there's a lot of similarities from my understanding. My husband and I couldn't understand anything. We were sitting there just observing this meeting. And at first, the students in India seemed shy and a little nervous and a little hesitant. Part of that is because the Pakistani actors were older, professionals, they weren't students. And also, I know that they were probably a little trepidatious because what are the things they hear about people on the other side of the border and that otherness, right? Um, but as the meeting went on, I saw the students start to relax and warm up, and this wonderful conversation going on. And at the end of 90 minutes, I said, okay, well, this was how long the meeting was supposed to be, and we need to wrap it up now. And the students didn't want to leave. They didn't want the meeting to be over. And they were writing in the chat, and several of them saying, we want to do this again, and we want to stand on the border and demand that we be allowed to work together. And I thought, if I do nothing else in this 6 months, this was worth it, because this is exactly what the mission of Fulbright is about: soft diplomacy, person to person contact, and building bridges of mutual understanding. So that made and I will say that there were some real challenges with the project in India, not because of the students, but that night made it all worth it to me. And I felt like I'd accomplished what I'd set out to do, or a portion of what I'd set out to do.
That sounds like, wow, it's such an incredible story. And I agree with you that it really kind of exemplifies what Fulbright is all about. And that takes me to another question because I think you are still an active member at the Fulbright Association, or
I am. Yes, I'm the vice president of our local chapter. Yeah.
great, which is Central New York, right?
Correct.
Absolutely. Okay, so I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about Fulbright Association's work, and if other people might be also interested in supporting the work that it's doing, or if they want to join. So, what can you tell us about Fulbright Association right now, and what is the work that you've been doing?
Well, the Fulbright Association is um, predominantly for alumni of the Fulbright program, although current Fulbrighters can also be involved, and also friends of Fulbright, anyone who's interested in the Fulbright mission. And I would say it's kind of twofold, and one of the things has become much more important recently, and that's advocacy for the Fulbright program. Last spring, I joined a bunch of Fulbrighters, Fulbright alums down in DC, and we went to Capitol Hill and met with staff of different representatives to ask them to support funding for the Fulbright program because every year that funding needs to be approved. And as you can imagine, it's a challenging time. So we advocate for the Fulbright program. And also we support visiting Fulbrighters. And that's why I first became involved in it because my husband and I were so warmly welcomed in both India and Pakistan. And I wanted to make sure that Fulbrighters coming here to the United States were getting that same kind of support and welcome. So that's really the two big things that the Fulbright Association does. Um, they really want to engage alumni and keep them engaged, and thus help us advocate for this program that, for myself was life changing. And I want to make sure it continues.
I think that's a great point for me to ask you. What would you say for people who are considering applying for a Fulbright grant? Because we started off this conversation and you mentioned, you always thought this was for somebody else, right? For scholars or for somebody who's kind of like an unattainable thing, right? And then you realized actually it really wasn't like that. So can you tell me a little bit about, what would be your advice for people who are thinking about applying for Fulbright? Maybe they're not feeling so confident or they're not sure. What would be your advice for them?
Um, Find a project you're passionate about and be able to communicate that passion in simple, understandable terms. You have to remember that the people on the reviewing board, and I've been on the other side. I helped with choosing Fulbrighters from the U.S. students coming to India. For Pakistan, I've reviewed applications for Pakistanis coming to the U.S. And I also was invited and did similar work for the Egypt Commission. Um, I would say, be able to tell a good story in your narrative and don't be afraid to show your passion because you have to remember this is what I was going to say that people like me might be reading your application and say you're a scientist. I'm not a scientist. So, and if I'm reading 90 applications, you need to make sure that the impact of what you're going to do is understandable to me, to an everyday person. Um, and two other pieces of advice is just go for it because if I can get a Fulbright, you can get a Fulbright. Um, and also don't be discouraged if you don't get it the first time. I was lucky the first time in 2010 and my application was accepted. But when I applied in 2022 first, I made it through the first round, and then I wasn't awarded a Fulbright, and I was devastated. But after about a week of licking my wounds, I decided to try again, and I made some adjustments to my application, and the second time I was awarded the Fulbright.
I think that's fantastic advice. And I think it's very important for us to also let people know how they can support the Wheels for Women project or any of your other projects. I mean, I know I would be very interested in seeing some of those plays that you've mentioned, or reading some of the transcripts of the interviews you've done. So um, how can people support you? How can they find you? Especially if they want to get involved with like Wheels for Women, maybe they want to donate as well. Like, do you have a platform, or what's the best way to reach out to you? Should they find you on Fulbrighter?
Well, they can email me at kmulligan@ithaca.edu. I'm happy to have people email me. We do have a website. It's rudimentary, I would say, but we're working on it. And you make me realize I'm going to, I want to make sure that there's a way for people to donate on that website. And it is wheelsforwomen.org, but it's wheels and then the number 4 women.org. And that's our website. And we'll be producing a cabaret in February. I think it's going to be in February. That's when it usually is. And there will be information about the cabaret on that site.
We're going to add the website also to the description of this episode so that people can easily find it. But now we know that maybe somebody can help you with the website itself. I'm sure there are developers who may be listening to us as well, so maybe they want to support on that front. Um, so I think this is, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our interview. I enjoyed this enormously. I think the work that you're doing is absolutely inspiring, important. So I'm so happy to have met you and heard a little bit more about it. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we go, Kathleen?
Uh, just to, if there's a way that you can support the Fulbright program right now, please do. They need us more than ever, and I I know for myself it was a life-changing experience and continues to be. And any way that you can advocate, if people want to go to the Fulbright Association website, I'm sure there's information there about letter writing and how you can advocate for the program. But I want to thank you. This has been so pleasant, and your questions were so fantastic. And I will say it's such a joy to be interviewed by someone who obviously really did a research. So that made it just so enjoyable for me, and I thank you for the opportunity.
No, thank you so much. And also, before we go, I want to remind the listeners that we're always looking for great stories to tell. So you can always sign up. We send out a newsletter on Fulbrighter every month, and you can find the link to sign up to tell your story there. You can also find Kathleen there. So make sure you join Fulbrighter. It's a place for people to connect and to get to know each other and to support each other's projects. So we're really looking forward to seeing all of you there. So thank you so much, Kathleen, for your time. This has been fantastic. Congratulations on your work, and I will be looking forward to the next cabaret for sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.